Hey, welcome to the lesson about GCP Black Box methodology. This is also the Red Team methodology we are going to be learning during this certification. And during this lesson, you can expect to talk about all the different steps that our Red Team is going to be having, but we are going to be specifying each of these steps in a GCP environment, so we learn how an attacker might get some kind of foothold inside a GCP environment, exploit it, enumerate all the services and privileges, and just try to escalate privileges and perform post-exploitation attacks until at some point the attacker, the red teamer, is not going to be able to perform any other action, and he will need to indicate the company all the vulnerabilities that he has discovered, but also all the risks that these vulnerabilities implies, just to make sure that the company fixes this. I really hope you enjoyed this lesson. I think this is going to be a very, very fun lesson. So yeah, I also hope you learn a lot. So let's start talking about the cyber kill chain. This cyber kill chain is going to be all the steps performing in our case in a red team assessment. And of course, the cyber kill chain can have more or less steps. In my case, these are the ones that I like. So these are the ones that we are going to be discussing during this black box red team methodology. So usually a red team is going to start with some discovery and enumeration. So in a regular red team, you're going to be starting just knowing the client, the company that you need to attack. And just with this name, you will need to check for domain, subdomains, IP addresses, webs, technologies, anything that you can find publicly available about the infrastructure and technologies that the company is using. During this phase, the enumeration phase, you are going to be spending actually most of the time, because you will need to find out as much as possible of the company, so later you can move to the exploitation phase. And basically in the exploitation phases, having performed some enumeration and finding some vulnerabilities, you are going to be exploiting them in order to get some kind of access to the company. As we are going to be focusing on GCP environments, this exploitation phase is referred to some exploitation that will grant us some foothold inside the GCP environment of the company. Of course, during the enumeration, we should have found that actually the organization is using Google Workspace and potentially GCP as their cloud provider in order to continue our red team over the GCP environment. So in the exploitation phase, we will just end up having some foothold, so some credentials, some access to a virtual machine inside GCP environments, anything that give us some kind of access over GCP. With this access, we are going to be start the internal enumeration, which basically means to figure out the permissions that we have gotten with the credentials or the access we compromise, and also the services that are being used. Of course, in GCP, if you don't have any permission unless it is explicitly granted. So this enumeration phase is going to be depending a lot on the permissions we manage to get from the exploitation foothold. Of course, if we are lucky enough, maybe during the enumeration we found several vulnerabilities and we managed to exploit several of them. So we might have found several footholds inside the GCP environment. In that case, it's recommended to run this internal enumeration with all the service accounts or principals we compromise, because different principals are going to be having different permissions who are going to be able to enumerate different stuff inside the GCP environment. Once we have performed the internal enumeration, we should be knowing at least the permissions, more or less the permissions we have, and even which services are being run, and which other services we can contact with the foothold we compromise. And it's time to start some post-exploitation attacks. So maybe try to read some sensitive information, check if we can move laterally. Then with this permission, we could also set some persistence, because at the end, the blue team might discover the attack vector we use to get a foothold inside the GCP environment. So before they fix this, we want to make sure we are going to be able to continue accessing the GCP environment. So depending on the permissions, we are going to be able to set some or other persistence, if any, because of course, in order to perform these persistent attacks, we will need to have some degree of permissions. And then we can just perform some privilege escalation. Again, depending on the permissions and the access that we got, we are going to be able to escalate privileges to other principals. And if this is the case, we are just going to be starting again the wheel. We will exploit the previous escalation vector, we will get some potential new credentials, we will do the internal enumeration, we check for new post-exploitation attacks, we will set new persistence if we have access to new permissions that allow us to do this, and we will, with this new enumeration, we will check if we can continue our previous escalation wheel, and in that case, again, we exploit it, enumerate again, post-exploitation, persistent, previous escalation, and we will continue this wheel at least until we don't see any other way to continue moving, to continue escalating privileges, moving laterally, or whatever attack we can perform over the GCP account. At that point in time, it will be the perfect time to do some profit. So depending on all the privileges we manage to compromise, we are going to be able to perform one of the other actions. Of course, more of the profit techniques are more related to cyber criminals than to red teamers. So for example, here we are talking about some KMS ransomware, some crypto mining to dump all the sensitive information and then ask for a ransom to not leak all the sensitive information. At the end, this phase is not for red teamers, but it's interesting for us to be aware of the possibilities, because we need to make sure that the client understands the risk of all the vulnerabilities you have been found in order to make sure that they are going to fix it. Just because you can tell them, hey, I just escalate privileges to maybe even organizational administrator, it doesn't mean that they are going to be fixing them, because maybe they say, okay, but we don't have anything running. So you need to explain them, of course, all the risk that this kind of access is going to be granting a potential attacker. So yeah, at the end, these are going to be the steps we are going to be following in this black box red team methodology. So let's get started to talk about each of these steps in a more deep way. So let's start our red team. Let's suppose we are targeting HackTricks XYZ. As we mentioned, one of the first things you could be doing is just to check if the domain is actually using Workspace. So we have already done a demo about this, but a very easy way to try to think that the domain is actually using Workspace is to check if there is any TXT record in the DNS with this Google site verification string. In this case, there is. Now what we could do to finally confirm that HackTricks XYZ is actually being used in Workspace is to try to create a Workspace domain and try to use as web domain hacktricks.xyz, and Google should let us know that, hey, this domain is already being used and you cannot use it again. We have already done this demo, so I'm not going to be doing it right now. Another way to try to find out, well, actually the first way we are going to be looking at in order to try to get some credentials to access a GCP environment is going to be through GitHub leaks. So here I have a repository. This is actually a GitHub repository, a web page hosted there that actually is sharing with you a lot of different regular expressions that you can use to find sensitive information. The ones that we are interested in now are the ones related to Google. So here we have some Google Platform API key, Google Drive Auth, Google Auth Access Token. It starts with this string. These are actually JSON keys of the GCP service accounts. So this is very interesting. And also we should be having the Google API key. So using these regexes to search maybe millions of repositories for leaks, we are going to definitely find some valid ones. So, for example, we could be searching for these regexes inside GitHub using the GitHub feature to search for source code. And here I have indicated the regex for Google API keys, and we can see that we have almost 1 million matches. What could we do with these API keys? Well, we could be accessing different different Google APIs endpoints, which is interesting if we want to not pay for that access. But actually, from a red team's perspective, what is interesting about this case, if you remember, is that we are able to get the project number where this keys belongs to, which at least is some interesting information for us. A more interesting search is going to be this one, where we are actually searching for files that contains potential service account JSON credentials. So of course, none of them are going to be valid match. Here you can see that, this is actually not a valid private key, definitely. But if we check all the close to 40K leaks, we might be able to find some valid ones, definitely. Of course, when you are doing a red team assessment, you don't want to search for leaks across all GitHub. You might be just interested in searching for leaks that affects your specific company. So you might just search this kind of regexes inside GitHub repositories that you know that belongs to the big team company, to that company. Another search we could perform is to search for OAuth tokens. Remember that these OAuth tokens are going to be expiring at some point, so I don't think we are going to be getting here a lot of valid OAuth tokens, but you never know. So it's also it's worth it to just run this query and see if you can find anything affecting the company you are attacking. Another thing that might be interesting to do is to search or to check for service account names and username names. At the end, for this step, you need to remember all the things, all the demos that we have previously done, and all the methods that we have commented in each lesson in the GCP services, where we talk about how we could abuse each service. We have talked about to get some kind of unauthenticated access, enumeration, and whatever that starts from an unauthenticated point of view. So if you remember, there was an option to enumerate, for example, service account names, just trying to assign it some kind of permission. So in this case, I'm going to be trying to assign some permissions to a non-valid service account. I don't know if I have access or I need to log in. Does not have permissions to access the project. Yeah, this one right here. Okay, let me just include auth list. I need to log in with a different account, so we are going to be using actually a different account, a different GCP organization. So login. Let me get here. Let's go to Google Chrome. Okay. Cool. So let's now do a quick demo about how we could be brute forcing our permissions over some project or over some specific organization. In this case, I'm going to be running this brute force my GCP perms. In this case, I am indicating the project Digital Bonfire, and here I am indicating the organization with this ID. The main difference between these two command lines, apart of the project and organization, is that here I'm going to be indicating I want it to be verbose, and here I didn't indicate so. And of course, we are going to be indicating the token to brute force permissions over, and I'm just going to be generating on the fly. So we run these two options. The first thing that it is going to be happening, that this script is doing, is downloading all the GCP permissions that exist, and then it's going to be starting some brute forcing. So the main difference or the difference whenever you execute this command line with verbose option and without, so with verbose option here and without verbose option, is that the verbose option is going to be giving you all the permissions that it is finding as soon as it finds it. So here you can see found all these permissions, found all these permissions. However, without the verbose option, we are just going to be waiting until the end, and then it is going to be showing us a list of permissions that were discovered. Also, remember that this user have owner access over the organization, so basically it's having almost all the permissions over all the projects and of course over the organization. That's why we are finding so many permissions in here. So while this ends, because it might take maybe 3 to 4 minutes, we can just check another way to get permissions. In this case, we are just going to be using the method getIamPolicy over a specific project. And we are going to be getting all the permissions that have been directly attached to the project. So for example, the role service user consumer was given to the member user support at HackTricks.xyz. Yeah, this way, just remember that this way you're going to be able to find all the permissions that have been attached directly to this specific resource. So remember that in this case, a project is a child of an organization. All the permissions that were granted over the organization are applying also to the project, but checking the permissions over the project are not going to be showing you those permissions. So this way we are only able to check the permissions specifically given over this specific project. And yeah, this is still running. So maybe we can also check if we have enough privileges, as we do at this point because we are using an owner user. Maybe whenever you compromise a user or a service account inside your Red Team, you might not be able to run this query. But at this point we can, so we could just search all IAM policies inside this scope. And this is basically going to be giving all the IAM policies that have been granted in these organizations and in children of this organization. So for example, let me search. For example, here we have that these permissions were granted over this project. So this is the main difference from this get IAM policy to this search all IAM policies, is that we are getting all the IAM policies of this object and its children, while here we are just getting the IAM policies granted to the specific resource. But it's true that usually users that you compromise during a Red Team, at least the first users, are not going to be able to execute this. However, I guess it's worth to give it a try. And regarding profit, whenever we arrive to this stage of the Red Team, we have potentially finalized the Red Team, at least the parts regarding GCP. So the best profit from a Red Team point of view is going to be the satisfaction of having compromised the whole company GCP environment, or at least part of it, and we can now just report it and make sure they fix all the vulnerabilities and they harden their GCP environment. However, something that is interesting from a Red Team's perspective is to let the client know what an attacker might be able to do if he manages to get this kind of access. So they just get a little bit scared and they actually fix all these all the vulnerabilities that were discovered during this Red Team. So something that it is kind of common whenever an attacker manages, a real malicious attacker, not like a Red Team, manages to compromise some GCP environment, is to do some crypto mining. So maybe just mining some Bitcoin, Ethereum, any other Monero, any other coin. That is interesting from an attacker's perspective, because at the end, cloud just allows user to spin up some virtual machines, some services that are going to be running arbitrary code. Attackers can just mine crypto and they will be making some profit without you necessarily know who they are, because at the end they are just getting some crypto. An attacker also could dump every kind of sensitive information from the environment, which might be more or less sensitive and important, and then perform some kind of ask for some kind of ransom to the company in order to not leak all this information. Another attack that I haven't really seen this, but I guess this is still possible, is to just kill everything. If you have enough permissions, you're going to be able to kill all the sources, all the resources inside GCP, and perform a denial of service. Of course, if the client is using something such as Terraform, some infrastructure as code, he's going to be able potentially to rebuild the environment in just some minutes, hours, and this shouldn't be a problem from clients that are using this kind of technology. However, I know about several companies that are just managing the cloud manually. So if someone managed to just delete everything, they are potentially going to be taking days or weeks in order to just build everything from scratch again, which might be a real pain for a company. And of course, we have also talked about potential ransomware in GCP. So yeah, it could be able to just perform some kind of ransomware attack into different services and then ask for some money to the client in order to give them back the keys in order to decrypt all these services. I'm pretty sure there are other prefixes that real malicious attackers might be using, but these are just some common ones that you can recommend the client in order to make them aware of these potential dangers, so they actually fix all the vulnerabilities and harden as much as possible their GCP the GCP security in order to not get compromised again, but the next time from a real attacker.